Take a look at this note. Is this G sharp or A flat? Well, the answer is, it depends. In this video, we're going to talk about why notes might be sharp versus flat, and by the end of it, you will never be confused by this again. There are a few different reasons why we might consider something to be sharp or flat, and all those reasons are important for us to understand so that we're not confused about A, what we're reading, or B, what we should write or talk about when we're talking about a note as being sharp versus flat. And the first thing that we need to do to understand what on earth we're even talking about here is to show you all of the different note names that they could be, even though we're playing the same key. So this may not seem super difficult on the surface because after all, we only have 5 black keys to worry about. But it's more complex than that, and we'll get to that in just a few moments. First of all, if I play this key, we know that we could either call this C sharp or D flat. And moving on up, this key could either be D sharp or E flat. This is either F sharp or G flat, G sharp or A flat, and finally that brings us to a note that is either A sharp or B flat. Now, are those all the sharps and flats that exist? No. How is that possible? I thought sharps and flats were the black keys. Well, it's a little more complex than that. The default unchanged name of any note, yes, is indeed the white keys, right? We have C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and then we just restart the whole thing over again with C, right? So while it is accurate to say that we can't actually play any of the black keys without specifying something as being either sharp or flat, that isn't all there is to it. What if I told you that a white key could also be a sharp or a flat? Imagine a planet on which I play this, which you and I clearly recognize as a B, except I tell you, nuh-uh, that's actually C flat. Well, how can that be possible? I thought sharps and flats were just black keys. Kind of, but also not really. Here's the really important thing to understand about sharps and flats. And if you understand this, it will change your thought process when it comes to sharps and flats, and you will never be confused by them again. Sharps and flats, in a sense, you could say, are not nouns. They are words that are literally just instructions. If we think of them as instructions, all of a sudden, everything gets a lot clearer and we start to understand what a sharp and a flat actually does or is, right? What I mean by instructions is that the word sharp isn't saying, oh, well, this object is sharp. No. It's telling us to do something to a given note. Let's go back to C sharp. Remember, we said that this could be C sharp or D flat. Okay, well, what if it is C sharp? The word sharp has only told us to do something to a C. We know this is a C, right? What did we do to it to get to here? We simply moved up by 1/2 step, okay? Is that what the instruction is? Move up by 1/2 step? Let's try it out. If we play a G, well, what if we move that up by 1/2 step? We end up here. Okay, that checks out because that is G sharp. Now, that could also be A flat, depending on the situation. Okay, well then if sharp and flat are simply instructions, then what does flat tell us? If this is A flat, then that means we took an A and we did what? We moved it down by 1/2 step. Well, that makes sense. I mean, if sharp makes something move up by 1/2 step, then obviously flat might mean we move it down by 1/2 step. And if you understand that, you immediately understand why a sharp or a flat can absolutely be a white key. Check this out. Start on C, and let's say, what if we want to play C flat? Well, you first might go, well, this C doesn't have a flat because there's no black key right there. But we just said, the word flat is an instruction. It's something that we want to do to this C. All we're going to do is follow the instruction. Move this down by 1/2 step. Well, that brings us to B, right? Kind of. It's the same key that we used to play B, but it's not. It's C flat. Bear with me here. We're gonna go over all of this, okay? How about this note right here? You know this note. It's F, right? But what if I told you, that's E sharp. What do we do with a sharp? We move it up by 1/2 step. Well, there's no black key to hit in between E and F. So I guess that means that's just E sharp? You're absolutely right. Once you understand this, your whole world with sharps and flats just goes poof, except you all of a sudden you understand it so much better. By thinking of sharp and flat as simply instructions on something that you do to a given note, now we understand how a white key could be a sharp or a flat. Now, the more interesting and more important question to me is why would we want a white key to be a sharp or a flat? In the answer to that question lies the answer to the larger question of why this note might be a G sharp and not an A flat, or vice versa. Why would we ever want a white key to be called something stupid like C flat? What use is that for us? How on earth could that possibly be helpful? Check it out. The first answer goes back a very, very long time to ancient tuning systems. Believe it or not, this way that we tune the piano wasn't always around. Before, there were tuning systems that might have been based on different instruments. The piano wasn't even invented until the 1700s. So before that, music didn't sound like it does now. It sounded different, and there might be instances or instruments that couldn't play in certain keys. And without digging too far into the specifics of what all that was and what it sounded like, which we're gonna do in a future video, the important thing to remember is that in the past, tuning systems may have actually meant that depending on the context, if I'm playing a scale like this, that note would be a G sharp, and if I was playing a scale like this note, even though it looks the same, would have actually been tuned slightly differently. So that's like the ancient explanation, but the more practical explanation has to do with how we speak about music and how we write it out on paper. Let's look at the G flat major scale. Now, if you were to simply tell me what notes did I just play to create the G flat major scale, you might say, okay, fine, G flat, A flat, B flat, B, D flat, E flat, F, and G flat. And that's not necessarily incorrect. You're right to say that all of those names that you just said for those keys would result in the sound of a G flat major scale. However, that is not what we actually end up writing when it comes to the G flat major scale. And there's a very important reason why. The way the G flat major scale is actually written is as follows: G flat, A flat, B flat, C flat, D flat, E flat, F, and that brings us back to G flat. You'll notice we used that weird C flat, which we know is just a B. Why are we trying to call it C flat? Isn't that just overly confusing? It's actually not, and here's why. Let's go back to the first way that we talked about the notes. Only this time, we're gonna write it out on paper, and you're gonna notice two things that make this just an inconvenient way of talking about these notes. Let's check it out. G flat, A flat, B flat, B natural, D flat, E flat, F, and G flat. And you can immediately see the problem. Two things happen here. Number one, we have to use two different Bs. One is flat and one is natural. And if we're gonna talk about two different Bs in the same scale, that's gonna be a lot of correcting an accidental that we write. If we write a flat, now we have to cancel that flat and write a natural sign so that we know, hey, I know I'm writing this exact same note again, but one is flat and one is natural. That's just inconvenient. Secondly, if we call this B, our next note is D flat. If we go from B to D, well, we've now just skipped C entirely. It makes for a really messy organization system, and it creates some visual oddities when it comes to writing this out on music. These two notes clearly do not sound like either a major third or a minor third. That's a second. But if we're calling this B and this D flat, it appears on paper as though it's a third, when really it's not. We can see very clearly on the keyboard that this is a second, but by using pitches with accidentals that don't go together, we can create this confusion. So much of reading music is just visual estimations. We get so used to seeing that a line to a line is a third and a line to a space is a second. So if we write out this, only we do it with a B and a D flat, it's just confusing to look at it first. Now you can understand, okay, that's a natural, that's a flat, I guess it really is this. But for a moment you're gonna be like, wait, am I supposed to play this or that? It's just a messy way of writing. Furthermore, I don't know about you, but I don't wanna have to think in sharps and flats at the same time. It's hard enough to deal with just one. So why would we want to mix sharps and flats together in the same scale? In addition to creating all those visual problems, it's just way too much to try to think about. Imagine something as nice and clean as the A flat major scale, right? We write it with an A flat, a B flat, a D flat, and an E flat. Those are the flats in the key of A flat. Well, what if we started writing, okay, A flat, A sharp, C, D flat, D sharp, E sharp, G, and A flat. Not only is it incredibly confusing to try to explain or say, it looks terrible on a sheet of paper. This gets even worse when we start dealing with something that should be really simple, but we can easily make extremely overcomplicated, like the difference between D flat and C sharp. They're pretty clean when it comes to reading them as each other, just one or the other. But if we start mixing and matching, oh boy. C sharp, E flat, F, G flat, G sharp, B flat, B sharp, C sharp. It's just dumb. I mean, we can so clearly see why we want to stick with one or the other. Not to mention, if this scale is called D flat, then why would we use a sharp in a flat scale? Likewise, if we call it C sharp, we're going to stick with all sharps. Now, it doesn't just come down to scales. This can also come down to harmonic context. If I'm playing a C minor triad, we know that a triad is made up of 1, flat 3 in the case of minor, and 5. So therefore, it makes perfect sense to say C, E flat, and G. Again, this is kind of a visual thing too, because we recognize this shape on paper as a triad. We do not really recognize nearly as well that if this was C and this was D sharp and that was G, well, the resulting notes still sound like a C minor chord, but a triad is not made with a second, even if that second is sharp, which makes it the correct note. You see, it just immediately gets super weird and just really not organized at all. We can also find the answers to why we should use sharps versus flats in chord progressions. Imagine this chord progression that you probably recognize. Classic 4-chord pop progression, right? Now, we would typically look at this as E flat major, B flat major, C minor, and A flat major. Why would we look at it as that and not D sharp major, A sharp major? Oh, well then, what does that make this? If we went from here up 1, I mean, wouldn't we have to be going now from an A to a B of some kind? So does this have to be B sharp minor? And then G sharp minor? What is B sharp minor? What does that look like? Oh, yikes. Well, that would be B sharp, and then this would have to be, if this is a B, oh man. Are we starting to get into like, what is this, F double sharp? It becomes a mess immediately. So at the beginning, when I said, what is the answer to whether this is sharp or flat? I said, it depends. What does it depend on? Well, in the simplest terms, it depends on context. The context, the harmonic context, is everything when we're deciding whether we call something a sharp or a flat. If we know that the scale is C sharp, well, we're going to be dealing with a bunch of sharps. If we know that it's D flat, we know we're going to be dealing with a bunch of flats. If we know the chord progression goes in a particular direction that warrants a flat chord versus a sharp chord. It's all about the organization of our pitches, and in particular, how easy it is to communicate those with others and write them down on paper. And yes, in past tuning systems that we typically don't use anymore, there may have actually been a physical sound difference between G sharp and A flat. But we don't deal with that the way that the piano is tuned these days. So the most important thing for you to remember is that context is everything. As is usually the case with music, and sharps and flats are just one of the many things that you learn in our Intro to Piano course on Better Piano. And right now, if you have any interest in picking up that course for 50% off, we are running a very limited time offer. We usually do this about once a year, where the Intro to Piano course is 50% off, and that is right now using the link in the description. Depending on when this comes out, you don't have a ton of time to take advantage of that still, so be sure to jump on that while you can. And that course is jam-packed full of all of the music fundamentals, as well as the physical playing the piano fundamentals. Even if you've never touched a piano before, this course will give you all of the basics and get you started playing this instrument today. With tons of exercises and downloadable resources and PDFs, it has everything you need to get your journey started. So use that link in the description, pick up the Intro to Piano course for 50% off while you still can, and I will see you inside the course over on Better Piano. And that's it for this video. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments down below. If any part of this was confusing, I'm happy to clarify further. And feel free to put your topic requests in the comments down below as well for things that you would like to see covered in a future video. But for now, that's going to be all from me. Thank you so much for watching this video. We will see you next time.